Welcome to Poet to Poet, Writer to Writer. My name is Doug Holder, and I'm here with David Daniel, um, uh, noted poet, lives right around here, Belmont, I think, right?
Right?
And many years in Cambridge. He's the author of Seven Star Bird from Grey Wolf, and has a new collection. And he has a collection out from the Pitt series, Ornaments, and he has a new one out called What Love Is. Am I correct? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it's not
And
out yet, but
it's not out yet, but he's working on it. And he teaches creative writing at Fairleigh Dickinson University, ran Plowshares for a while, a long while. So the first question I was going to ask you, I'm no literary critic and I don't know much about what was it, Hart Crane, but I mean, Harold Bloom evidently thought that you were the new Hart Crane. And I did a little research, and I think I read The Bridge a long time ago. But he was highly influenced by T.S. Eliot, and he was also known as a difficult poet to read. And from what I read of your work, it's not difficult to read. I mean, it's profound, but it's not difficult to read.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's uh, thank you. I'm glad that's the case. That's certainly my hope that it's not putting up any barriers. And I think what Bloom said, which was like, the greatest day of my life in the
Of
literary
course,
world, is when he wrote that, sort of out of the blue, actually. And I think what he was, referring to really was sort of the fact that I tend to emphasize the sound of language as much as anything else. And so, there's a very dense music, and especially in that, well, both books of those, but in the book that he was talking about, there's some really dense language in terms of just sonic density. And I think that that's what he was.
and he was an urban poet too. I think a lot of your
That's right. That's right. And he came, I think, from Ohio originally, and ended up becoming more New Yorker than New Yorkers. That, and I feel like I'm sort of have taken the same path as someone who is from Tennessee and has lived all of my life, in an urban environment for the most part here in Cambridge and Boston. Um, but he was what is known as a word drunk poet. And I think that that's a pretty good description of what I am too, which is like someone who just loves the sound of words. And so I am driven as much by the music of the language as I am by anything that I have to say, because I feel like most of what I have to say is, sort of trivial. It's sort of the same old things that people say, but if I can say it in a beautiful way, or if I can come up with something that just sounds to my ear exciting, then that's what I prefer. That's what I'm after. So I think that's so yeah. Crane he is a magnificent poet, but he is very, very difficult. Some of my favorite poems, there's a uh, one of them goes Voyages 2, and it goes, her undeniable vast belly, what is it, her undeniable vast belly moonward bends, wrapping what is it, oh my gosh, wrapped in, no, I'm screwing it up, vast belly moonward bends, laughing the rapt inflections of our love. I have no idea what those lines mean.
but they're
Apparently,
beautiful.
it's about a whale breaching, perhaps, or under no vast belly moonward bends, laughing the rapt inflections of our love. And I just, and so especially as a young poet, I was stunned by people who wrote like that and just loved it, even though I had no idea what they were talking about.
It was just like you were saying, it's the music of it and the
Absolutely.
sound. Um, yeah. Now, when you were editor of the Plowshares magazine, and I know from DeWitt Henry, who was your colleague for a long time, that it was it started out in the Plow and Stars and the humble beginnings, and it became one of the great literary magazines in the country and the world. I mean, what do you think is the secret behind it? Uh,
Well, so DeWitt had started it, like I said, out of the Plow and Stars with Peter blank his name right now,
O'Malley, right? O'Malley.
O'Malley,
Yeah.
and I came along in the mid to late '80s, and it was already, extremely established as a very important magazine, but it was primarily a regional, it was known regionally. I mean, it certainly had national poets. It wasn't small time at all. But around the time that I came, Don Lee came into the picture, and he was there just before me. And Don was actually the editor. I was the poetry editor. I was a reader first, as a poetry reader, reading The Slush and just doing things. And then over time, Joyce Pesaroff stepped down as the poetry editor, and then I became the poetry editor for 12 years or so. And I believe it was Don Lee's vision, frankly, that made the difference. It sort of catapulted the magazine from again, it's an exaggeration to say it was a regional magazine. It was more than that. But Don brought I think a tremendous amount of diversity and richness to it, and also, thanks to him pursuing some grant opportunities, we were able to get larger distribution, which was a big deal, and allowed it to become, what it became. And I've always felt like my part was minor in that. And it was Don. To me, Don is one of the great heroes of the Boston literary scene. Partly because he was the amount this is almost, what is this, say 1995 or so. He's putting together a really diverse magazine, edited, because we had rotating editors. Don and I did a few editions ourselves, but it rotated, and Don chose the guest editors, and those guest editors were from all backgrounds, etc. And I think that brought such a range of voices that it became, really a front runner in terms of being, just an open magazine instead of just a clubbish one. And I
Okay.
think that's, all the credit goes to Don. He's a brilliant, brilliant man with a great vision. So
Is he still with it? Is he still
he,
with?
he's not. He left the same time I did, at early 2000s. Was it 2005 or so, somewhere in there? And he became very successful as a novelist, and so he went on just to teaching positions, because the problem with being an editor is that everybody thinks you're an editor, right? They don't think that you're a writer, even if you are. And I think Don did what he did, and was ready to move on to doing what he really loved, which was that. But his ability to sort of, he's friends with everybody, and was able to just bring together a bunch of really awesome people. And I think the staff there, that was sort of behind us, but that was sort of roses. There's an amazing array of interesting people who've gone on to careers of their own as writers. So I'm very proud to have been associated with that, for sure.
Yeah, you should be. Now, you were born in the South, and you said Tennessee, and I'm sure you've seen your share of racism. And, oh, my cat's bothering me here. You have written poems about and we've written poems about the civil rights and racism and things of that nature. But I'm going to bring it back to, and being as a poetry editor, we are in heightened times now, especially with Donald Trump leaving, and during his time it was awful. But do you think, I'm going to go to Don Scher, who was the editor of Poetry Magazine, and he actually resigned because of a poem he published, which was perceived as it was perceived as giving a negative impression of people of color. I'm wondering if you thought that was appropriate, or to go too far, or to go not enough. If you had an answer that.
Yeah, I mean, those are such tricky questions. You know what I mean? I sort of feel strongly both ways. I have
You
to
read
say,
the poem. Did you feel the poem was inappropriate?
which poem is that? Because they've had a couple of incidents. You talking about the most
No, I'm
recent
talking about the one, yeah, where he was resigned over.
one? I'm not sure which one that was. Was that
Oh, yeah. The one about the family. The guy wrote about his family and servants and his mother's view of black
yeah,
people.
yeah. Um, you know, you know, I would just say that in my time of editing, as from, let's say, the 80s to 2000, I honestly wouldn't have thought twice about publishing a poem like that. I just wouldn't have, and that's maybe my failing, for sure. Uh, um, Nowadays, I think, and I talk to other editors, who are currently around, and they would certainly flag it now as something that was inappropriate. And I think that's just something so yeah, I think that if you, it's a kind of mistake to make. You're one is, it's like the most recent thing. I think without providing the context for why you chose something, just say, here was our editorial process. This is why we understand that this might be offensive, that kind of thing. Then I don't know if it's a fireable offense, and I think that there's an overreaction to those things often, but it was certainly a mistake. I feel like it's just being a little tone deaf to our times. It's unfortunate in a lot of ways, I guess, but I think, for instance, this latest poetry magazine issue that came up, I don't I don't know how. I mean, I certainly would never have tracked down and done a background search about what people have done in their lives before publishing them. I just wouldn't. I was dealing with the poems themselves, and in fact, I went to extreme ends because I know a lot of people in this business, not to even look at the names if I could help it of who I was reading. Just to sort of keep it as anonymous, so I'm just dealing with what's on the page and not all of my own prejudices and weirdnesses and friendships, whatever, in the background. Um, and but now you sort of have to look these people up, and find out. And I don't know how we couldn't have done that at Plowshares. We simply didn't have a staff. It's like, what would you have possibly done to find out if somebody's a bad person? There were plenty of times when I knew people were kind of sleazy people, and and I was not prone to putting their work out there. But I don't know. I mean, Doug, it's one of those things
It
where
is. It's a very complicated. I remember, being at some lecture at Harvard with Saul Bellow was there, and someone asked him, "Well, you use the word, kike, derogative names like that,"
yeah,
and he said, "Yeah, sure I do, because that's the way real people talked."
right.
And so, I'm not going to, sugarcoat it and things like that. So
Yeah, it really is hard. And I think, and I look back at the stuff that I was writing about race in class,
mhm.
15 years ago and 20 years ago. And I wouldn't write it that way now. It just, because I've learned more, and I think that things have changed. And, I
Yeah, well, even in fashion, what's appropriate, at one point is definitely not appropriate now. So things change.
absolutely. And it's also, I feel like that I have to learn as an editor and as a reader. And I have to learn, I have to grow to recognize my own limitations. I grew up in a very, I grew up in a sort of an aesthetic world where it was about what the poem said on the page. There was no concern. It didn't matter. John Berryman could do his essentially sort of blackface poems, and it was it was totally fine. It had nothing to do with him. It just wouldn't occur to one to look at it from that other lens. But nowadays, I feel like, and also to use the language that people use around you. But I, it just has become I've learned a lot about critical race theory through my wife, who's a graduate student at Harvard, and there are just things that I was just dead wrong about, just things that I just didn't understand. And I think that as a culture, I feel it's my responsibility to respond and to grow and to learn everything I can to be as sensitive as I can. At the same time, I do have a point of view. I feel like I should be able to write from anyone's point of view if I'm doing that. But I also realize if I do that, I probably won't publish those poems. You know what I mean? And I certainly, the last thing I want to do is offend somebody, except in a way that might, uh, I don't know, only to help them think more, maybe. But it's funny, I think Richard Pryor was my favorite. I think Richard Pryor is the greatest user of language in America in
Mm,
the
yeah.
1970s. I prefer him to any of the poets that were writing in the 70s that I'm aware of. I think he was an absolute genius, but good luck now. Looking at
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Well, I guess, yeah, we've got to change, it's a season for everything, I guess.
exactly.
Uh, Um, Now you founded this Wham Fest, and I noted that you brought of the many great poets and musicians and everything. You brought Bruce Springsteen and Robert Pinsky on stage. How was that? Maybe you
That
could
was
just.
fantastic. It was like a dream come true, frankly. I mean, it was something that when I first had the idea, I wanted to do something that I grew up in sort of as a musician and, in that songwriting world. And so I've always had these two parallel lives. One is sort of the fancy literary person, and one is like the, country boy who plays music, and then I thought, you know, in fact, one of the biggest revelations of my life is one day after I'd published my first book, I was listening to Hank Williams, and do you know that song "I Can't Help It If I'm Still in Love with You"?
Yeah, I believe so.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I kept singing it. And the song is basically, I can't help it if I'm still in love with you. I can't help it if I'm still in love with you. I saw you walking down the street, and I still can't help it if I'm in love with you. And I just realized I had not written a single line as penetratingly true as Hank Williams, that dumbass, from Uneducated Nowhere, had done something so profound that was far beyond what I could do. And it utterly changed my orientation towards my own
Well,
work.
that's why we see a lot of outsider artists who make
Absolutely,
huge statements, and they're not, trained or schooled or anything.
absolutely. And I think our songwriters do that. So for me, Whamfest was a kind of vision of trying to bridge the gap between those two worlds, between what we call high art and low art. The poet laureate of the U.S. in Robert's case, and the poet laureate of of the U.S. and the songwriting world in Bruce Springsteen. So when I first had the idea for the festival, that's who I had in mind, and I knew Robert a little bit, and I had um, said, "Hey, I'm trying to do this. Would you be game?" And he said, "Sure." And of course, he didn't take me seriously, because who would, right? And then over time, I became friends with a lot of Bruce's friends, and so Bruce loved the idea. He'd never done anything like that before, and he did it for free. I mean, he just said, "Okay, we'll do
Was
it."
there a chemistry between Pinsky and
It was
Springsteen?
fantastic. I mean, you can watch
They
the
were
movie.
both from New Jersey, right?
Yeah, they're both from New Jersey. They were both born in the same hospital, 10 years apart.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Robert's 10 years older, and they instantly hit off. We had a little session where we met before, they had never met each other before. That they had a little session before, like for an hour before they went on stage, and they got on stage and just fell in love. I mean, it was just, and they remained friends. He Bruce invited Robert to come to the Broadway show, when the show
Yeah, that was rich. Yeah.
Broadway show, and they've been great pals, and that's been it was miraculous. And the videos is online, you can watch it. It's just, you can watch the two of them as they recognize how much they have in common, not just New Jersey, although that's a part of it, but just as artists. Bruce wanted to be a writer, he wanted to be a novelist, and Pinsky wanted to be a jazz musician, and and
Yeah.
so the two of them sort of came together in a way that, I mean, it was, I mean, it was my idea, and I'm really happy about that. But I mean, if even take, and so I'm invested in a way. It was one of the greatest live performances I've ever seen. I mean, hands down. And I think that it was breathtaking. So it turned out to be that I was right for once. It's like, that there was this. And then the same thing happened with CD Wright and Roseanne Cash, for instance, who had never met and just became like sisters. They just got up on stage. You realize that, we have a lot more in
Well,
common.
like we were just discussing earlier, poetry is all about music. I mean, you can see
Exactly,
the link. Yeah.
exactly. But
Right.
culturally, we separate these things so
Yeah.
much. It's such a battle,
Remember when they gave Nobel Prize to Dylan? They were saying no, he's a songwriter, not a poet.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And and that's, so that come because I've been involved in these issues for a long time. A lot of people talk to me about their position about what the differences between lyrics and poems, and I'm just like, well, of course there are differences, but they share far more than they don't share. And so I've chosen to focus on what they share. And I think that there's no question that's, to me, a more productive way of talking about it. Who cares if Dylan's stuff doesn't work on the page necessarily? It doesn't matter. It's certainly a lot more like poetry. And I think Amanda Gorman which I thought that moment was probably the greatest single moment for American poetry in my lifetime, was watching her read that at the inauguration. And I was so moved by it. And then immediately there's chatter about, whether it was a good poem or spoken word poem and all these kind of vaguely
If you
racist.
were moved on by it, she moved a lot of people. I always thought that was one of the
I mean, so
criteria for a poem. Yeah.
unbelievable, right? I mean, that's what it's all about ultimately. But I think because the poetry world is this tiny little, I don't know, people, they want to keep it as like a club, it seems like sometimes. And when someone comes in and does something that's really, that revitalizes, that takes to millions of people the joy that poetry can bring, even if it's not according to your workshop standards the greatest poem on earth, who cares? Who cares? It's like it just misses the point of opening up a door to the possibility of language reaching millions of folks. I think of Howl, when Howl, Ginsberg's Howl, I don't, it's a hugely important poem. I mean, it's a catastrophe. It's like as big as you
Yeah,
can imagine.
yeah, but you make the point that it reached so many people, and I was certainly affected by it. But you could say that Rod McEwen's poetry was reached
Fair,
many people.
fair enough. And there are things about that, for instance, the sort of grotesque sentimentality that I think are bad. You know what I mean? I think that there's a difference, I feel like, between something like that, which is to me a kind of morally corrupt language, which is someone who is comparing, for instance, the death of a dog to the Holocaust or whatever he does. I mean, he has some outrageous metaphors and just these things that are just, I mean, again, not all of his work, but there's really specific examples that you can give of just how grotesquely manipulative he was of people's emotions. And whereas Amanda Gorman, that was just there were a lot of abstractions, but it wasn't sentimental. It was straight, it was clear. It was, you could, I just would say, you can take something like Howl, for instance, would not survive any kind of workshop in America today. I guarantee it. It would get destroyed. People would laugh it off as being, I don't know what, some monstrosity. But
What you're saying? If Howl was workshop today,
yeah,
you
if you
say that
put Howl in front of a
people
workshop,
teach it all the time, even at West Point. I mean, so.
oh, totally, totally. But if you took that, if somebody didn't know what Howl was, and you
Oh,
put it
okay.
in your workshop, if young Alan was walking into class today with his poem, it would be destroyed. It would, people would say, "Oh, this is great," make it into 10 lines or whatever, and sharpen this image and do this or that. It would, it would be an outrageous. There's just no way it would be accepted by the mainstream, and or by the standards of this. And I think that is also true, by the way, of most of the poetry that was written, for instance, in the 19th century, which was also profoundly abstract and rhetorical in the same way that the Amanda Gorman's poem is abstract and rhetorical. And to me, we pass these judgments as if we, are the absolute arbiter of what poetry is, when in fact we're bound by a particular moment in history that is just a tiny moment of fashion, like we were talking about before, and it's just unfortunate that people think they can't remember, it seems, or they can't accept something that doesn't correspond to what they have recently encountered, without having to feel like they have to pass a kind of judgment. And to me, that's that it's frankly painful. It's sort of I feel badly because it's as if it's a kind of pathology, I feel like, in the American poetry world of somehow, I don't know, it's like people act like they're um to me, there's a sense of like people want to be rock stars, but anybody who's successful, is going to be hammered. Anybody who actually reaches people, so they're in this bizarro world, where you basically can't like anything except for the things among your little crowd. It's and maybe it's been always that way, but
As far as I remember, Boston's been that way too.
sure.
Yeah, very much so. Now, in your title poem for Ornaments, you write brilliantly, in my opinion, about getting rid of the baggage of life, beating the detritus in the open light, letting it go, even though it will be still part of you. And in a way, this theme of connection between us all seems to reign in your poetry, and especially also another beautiful poem was um, Antonin, Antonin.
Oh, right, from the new book. Oh, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so I mean, maybe you could just comment on that. Am I wrong, or
Oh no, I mean, I think you're totally right. I mean, that poem "Ornaments" for me was, uh, you know, uh,
I think we published it in the Somerville Times.
you did, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was,
Um, y- that came to me as a literally a kind of revelation at a particular moment in my life, and uh, it was like being struck by lightning. I wrote that whole long poem in about, I don't know, 15 minutes
yeah,
sitting
every
in a.
once in a while you get a poem like that. Just you're
Yeah,
there, and so you can run to the table. Other poems you have to think about more, but every once in a while you get that
yeah,
flash.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And this is one that came, and everything but the ending came to me all at once. And then for months I knew that I this was the best thing I'd ever written. It was the most important thing to me personally. And then, one snowy day, I sitting at this desk. Actually, it came to me, and so yeah. So I think that poem. It is about letting go of things and trusting. I don't know how that there is, that life is very, very painful, and but it is painful for everyone, and that somehow by.
With little moments of enjoyment, right? Little moments of
Right, no,
happiness.
of course, right, of course, and it's not, it's, there are, there in that poem for me, it was about letting go in order that I could enjoy the little things, because I can enjoy the little things knowing that we all are in the same spot, right? That there is this, in the end of that poem, there's this notion of like that all of these things are sort of sparkling above us. And I don't know that I like the idea of it being like a heavenly image, but I do like the idea that all of our, they were all sort of mingling together, that there's something that brings us together rather
Just
than.
like those soldiers on the battlefield, the guy who kills the other guy, he's part of the other guy. I mean, that life, will continue on through him. So it's not like there's no separation between the enemy and between enemies, actually.
Uh, that's what
Yeah,
I think,
yeah.
and I think that, ultimately that's what, and talking about that poem and this whole book is, it's a book of love poems. They're poems about love, and that, somehow if you did kill someone, is that, the character in that poem has, the actual story behind that is that this was the case of a man who had, at the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, had shot, came up to a man in a foxhole and ended up sort of looking him in the eye and killing him, even though he didn't have to kill him. But it was like he was under orders to kill him. So he kills him. They're both young. And
Yeah,
then,
I don't know if your father was a World War II veteran, but mine was, and he told me about, even though there was the Geneva Convention, you couldn't have Germans, who were your captives, behind you while you're fighting, so they would be forced to go out and, you know,
right, right.
yeah,
And this guy that I've read about had done this and had never spoken of it. And so now he's, early 90s, late 80s, and he tells this story about how he thought of this young man that he had killed every day of his life. He imagined he imagined all of the life that guy might have had he not killed him. And he felt like he had been with him and he wanted to share with that man all of the things that had changed, all of the advances over time, all of the life experiences he had with his, yeah. So to me, it sounded like a lover, right? So that
almost, yeah. It was like,
there
yeah,
was this way that they were bound forever. And so, to me, it's a really powerful story. And I was glad to have a chance to sort of, try to get the essence of it down in that little poem. Um,
it, it must be really great. I mean, I don't have children, but you have a very talented son. He's in musician and producer and all this, and you're actually going to get to work. Or you are in the process of working
Yeah.
with him. And I listened to some clips. It seemed to be acoustics. One song I listened to. He has a great voice. And tell me, what was that like working with your son on something like this?
Well, so in that particular case, that's actually all me. On that.
Oh, you're singing. Well, you have a good voice.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
He is a producer and songwriter. So, and yeah, he's become very, very fancy. It is amazing to watch. He's like, he's got gold records and platinum records and, all that stuff at 25, 26 now.
Oh,
Um, but we're
I
working.
got vinyl records from Jack's, but that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
And he, so what we're doing with this project though is like, so he writes a lot of hip hop and pop music. I mean, he has an album out right now that's it's huge, and it's like an old R&B record by a guy named Pink Sweats, and it's gonna be a huge album this year. But so he's mostly in the pop world, right? So, and I'm mostly in the singer-songwriter acoustic world. That's my thing. It's the only thing I can really play. So what we're doing is, I'll give him, he will give me like a really cool beat with all this sort of electronic stuff on it, and then I'll do the poems over that, and then he goes back and produces it. And so, and we're just sort of figuring out how we want to do it. So I've written like 10 poems, 10 songs, roughly. And now they go to him and he starts manipulating them, making them sound like, real things. Because the thing that you heard is just a rough that I did.
So you could be a pop star soon.
No, I will not. Here's a little tidbit, Doug. We are not going to be pop stars, nor is anyone who's over the age of 25.
Yeah.
Doc says that he is routinely 10 years older than the people he has in the studio. So they're signing these people at 16.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's typical to $1 million deals. And so no, it's the pop star thing is out of the picture for pretty much anybody who's 30 or more. So, what I would love, I mean, who knows? I try to get him all the time. Say, hey, can I just put a couple words in this lyric for you and see if somebody buys it so I can make some money? But so far that hasn't happened.
Well, you never know. Now listen, I saw one line. I have it here in my notes here. Everything turns into everything else. That was in a poem of yours. All right. I mean, would that be if you had to have one line to encapsulate you as a poet? Would that be a good one?
That's a good one. That is a good one. I mean, I think I hadn't thought of that, but I think that over time, right? One of the things that I've learned is that I don't know. It's just a constant.
Well, I always tell my students, we're all going to die. That's one thing we know. We're going to turn into a dust and maybe fertilize a piece of corn that future generations. So you might be in that piece of corn. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I also feel like just in life, it's just like this thing about how, I mean, I feel like I'm still growing, and I think that thrills me. And I feel like that there's this notion of always being able to change and develop and to be moved by stuff. I mean, I would honestly, I'm shocked to find myself being moved into the tears by Amanda Gorman's poem. Shocked.
Let me ask you a question. We're both in our 60s. We have a lot of experience under. When you were like 25, would you have torn apart Amanda Gorman's poem?
Absolutely, absolutely.
You would have.
I think I would have been. I think I was a jerk in general, but B, I think I had my standards for poetry I had my head up my butt, to tell you the truth, in terms of being. I tried to build myself from a country boy into a fancy literary guy.
Well, you did. You did. I know you're a regular guy though. That's why I like you for that.
Well,
but
thank you. But you know, that's I wanted to be something that I was not. And that comes at huge cost. At least for a while, right? Where you know, I just was inauthentic. So I think that I was under, you know, so no, I think I missed a lot of good things in life, a lot of joy because I was such a jerk, you know, I was such a, I don't know how to put it exactly. I just wanted to
so you
dislike.
were a poseur.
I guess so, you know, and I just was filled with judgment. You know, I was filled with like, oh, this is better than that, or this is no good, or somebody's no good, or you know, it was all about hierarchies and rankings and you know, that's what's all disappeared. You know, I just don't. I just like I don't care. I will listen to a great pop song with a lot of pleasure. I mean, yeah, literature probably moves me more than anything else. Great literature, you know, what I call great literature. But I'm so happy that I can take in fun, danceable music and enjoy it. I couldn't do that as a kid, you know, I couldn't. I was just I couldn't. And now I feel like I can. So yeah, there's huge change. So yeah, Amanda Gorman would have been, you know, I would have been bitter. I would have been sitting there going, why is she getting all this attention? You know, when I, you know, when I'm writing more like Keats or whatever, as if Keats matters, right? You know,
All right.
it's, you know,
Interesting. Yeah.
you know, and I think that that's, you know, part of like it, you know, like when you're talking about ornaments, is like letting go of all those things that I built that were, you know, the pieces of me or of my world that I thought were me, but in fact were masks of me. You know, there were things that were keeping me down. So by getting rid of them, by at least symbolically, you know, being free to enjoy stuff, right? Without worrying about, you know, I'm not one of those guys like who talks about the good old days because I don't think they were that good, you know. And I think that I love what this generation's doing. I love that my son is, you know, able to write stuff that reaches literally billions of people, you know, as opposed to, you know, me being stuck in a place where I'm lucky if 25 people have read a poem of mine, you
That's
know.
right. And
uh,
well, you ever have a reading where one guy's there and he's asleep? Yeah.
I haven't had a sleeper, but I did have somebody. This is a pretty funny story that I think you'll appreciate, Doug. It's like me and Peter J. Shippey, a wonderful poet, where we
Yeah, I know him. I mean, I know him through the internet. Yeah.
yeah, he's just a fantastic poet, fantastic friend of mine. We did a reading together in Portsmouth, I think, New Hampshire, on the night of a Red Sox playoff game. And
Oh
it was
boy.
and it was a really crappy night. Also, the weather was terrible. And we got there and there were two people, the woman who was running the reading and one other woman. And so Pete and I just said, well, okay, well, we'll just, you know, we'll do this anyway. But the woman who ran the bookshop was completely indifferent, right? But so there was just one woman sitting there listening to me and Pete read for a little while. And then after it was over, she comes up and she buys my book, but she doesn't buy Pete's. And I'm like, well, that's a little weird, you know. But then she so as I'm signing the book for her, she says, "Oh, you know, I brought this manuscript for you for Plowshares. Can you go look at this?" And I was just like, I was like, oh my God, this whole thing was just the only reason she was sitting. The only reason she was there is because she thought that I could do something for her at Plowshares. And I just thought, this is about as bad as it gets. So Pete and I just went to a bar down the street to watch the rest of the playoff game and have a couple of beers.
I had a bad experience in Portsmouth too. I was reading for the Poetry Hoot or something up there. It was run by the. But
Uh,
anyway, Portsmouth is a beautiful town though.
oh, I
But
love
yeah,
it. We go there
love
a
it.
lot. I love
Yeah.
it too. It just
So
wasn't.
maybe you could share a couple of poems with us of your choice. And
Sure. Let me actually, I didn't have one ready. I didn't know.
oh, okay, yeah.
Grab one here. Um, um, well, should I read ornaments since you mentioned that one?
Whatever
Let's.
you want to read. Whatever you want to read. I love
Well,
ornaments, of course.
there we go. So ornaments. Bring down your ornaments. Bring down the attic dust. Bring down the leaves, the husks of insects, the grease from windows. Bring down the clothes. Shovel them. Shovel them over the bodies you long ago brought down. Bring down the silver, the screaming, the cries of love. Bring them down and beat them. Bring them down to the street. Take a broom and beat them. Let the dust live in the sun shaft. Bring down their tiny planets. Beat them. Free them, those bodies. You wanted them once. You asked for them. Now bring them down. Bring down everything you've wanted, shattered or soiled. Some flag, some country you loved once, some child you lost. Bring them down and beat them, down to your streets and beat them. There is peace in it. There is peace in the beating. And bring down the poems you wrote, those strong feelings, the voice you had, so sweet, that beauty too, its lies, those centuries collapsed of stoop, of musky stone. There was such promise then, such future. Bring them down to your streets, take out a broom and beat them. The dust will catch fire in the sun shaft. It will light that light. It will burn it. Bring down those angels of glass, that hell, those whispers in your ear. They say, bring down the shame they died in, the suicide's longing, the bloody sheet, the first hard cock, then the mother's skittish love, the hazel of her eyes. Bring them all down. Bring them down to your streets and beat them. Bring down your fathers too. Bring down how they drank and drank, how they beat you with their drinking and the wars they took you to. How you sat there cheering so long ago, centuries now. Now you must take them out to the street, drive them like mules to the street and beat them, so you can take down the house itself, sweep off its skin, its muscle, to get to its galleried bone, to its teeth, then tie a string to the doorknob, slam shut the door and bring them all down. Pull out the floor, the windows, the walls, the twisted nails, the light that held them all. Then finally the door. Bring them all down into your streets, take out your broom and beat them. There is peace there. When the dust rises in the light of the sun, it will come alive. It will take your shape, sparkling, adorned. It will rise over the streets now filled with you, over the villages, the cities now filled with you. Its eyes are your eyes, and it follows you in wonder. It will bless you. It will look you in the eye and bless you.
See what I mean, folks? Fine poem.
Thank you.
One more? You want to share one more before we part?
Sure. Trying to find a shorter one. This book is filled with longish poems. Actually, let me read a small one from this other book. Just because we're talking about my son and the kids in general a little bit. And this one is from a long time ago when my now 26-year-old was about 6, and he came home with a joke. And this is sort of what happened to that joke. The joke. The skeleton, my son says, can't cross the road because it doesn't have the guts, which explains perhaps why it's still at the edge of our yard, looking out across the road into the dark. I'm just kidding. You see, it's us by the roadside, our bones the wind whistles, and the darkness beyond, that's ours also.
Nice.
Thanks. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. You write something when a kid's 20, it was 6, and now he's 26, and realize that, there's something, now that he's a man and we're out in the world of, he's like most young people, very angry with how things are in the world and how much darkness and sadness there is. And it's just like that notion of going from telling a little kid something to sort of realizing that now we are in it together, this sort of this place of, so much suffering, that belongs to everybody.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, David, Daniel, and
My pleasure.
we're looking forward to your new book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too.